There's a lie competitive players tell themselves without realizing it. If I'm good enough, the game will feel stable. But modern fighting games aren't built to feel stable. They're built to create pressure, speed, and uncertainty. So when players say, this game doesn't reward skill, they're usually not describing the game. They're describing a broken expectation. That expectation is older than people think. Most players learn skill through a model where improvement produced stability, where doing the right thing didn't just work, it felt right. Mistakes were obvious, punishment was clear, control looked visible. So when modern matches feel volatile, players assume the system stopped rewarding skill. But skill didn't disappear. What disappeared was the kind of feedback that used to make skill feel comforting. And that difference is where the misunderstanding begins. Most players learn competitive games through an older model, a model where improvement looked linear. You practice combos, you learn matchups, you punish mistakes, and results improved. Mistakes were obvious, punishments were harsh, control felt visible. If someone lost, everyone watching could usually explain why. The better player won. So players built an expectation. Skill leads to stability, stability leads to control, and control leads to victory. But modern competitive environments don't operate on that model anymore, and many players never adjusted their expectations. Modern fighting games are faster, interactions happen closer together, momentum shifts more often, defensive mistakes are less terminal. Systems now encourage constant engagement. Pressure loops restart quickly, turn taking isn't always clear, small decisions compound invisibly, so even when players make strong decisions, the outcome doesn't always look connected to them. And when cause and effect separate, confusion appears. Players stop saying, I misjudged that situation, and start saying, this game doesn't reward skill. What makes this shift hard to see is that improvement still happens quietly. Players react faster, they recognize situations sooner, they survive positions that used to end rounds immediately. But survival doesn't feel like mastery, it feels like barely escaping disaster. And when matches become about managing danger instead of avoiding it, improvement stops looking impressive. The player doesn't feel stronger, they just feel less helpless. And that subtle difference changes how people evaluate their own progress. Because when improvement stops feeling dramatic, frustration starts filling the space where pride used to live. The real issue isn't that skill disappeared, it's that skill stopped looking the way players expect. Skill used to show up as big punishments, clear dominance, obvious control. Now skill often looks like surviving bad situations, minimizing losses, escaping pressure barely in time, taking risk without confirmation. And those moments don't feel impressive. They feel messy. They feel uncertain. So players assume randomness has replaced mastery. But what's really happened is visibility change. Modern competitive systems compress time. Decisions overlap, mistakes snowball quickly, and players rarely feel safe. So when someone loses now, it feels sudden, unfair, unavoidable. Not because they didn't have options, but because the options weren't obvious in the moment. And when pressure hides options, the brain looks for simpler explanations. Luck, broken mechanics, unfair systems, anything except uncertainty. Because uncertainty feels personal. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most players don't just want skill to matter, they want skill to feel rewarded. They want reassurance, confirmation, a visible payoff for their effort. But competition doesn't promise emotional comfort. Competition creates tension, and modern fighting games increase tension deliberately because tension keeps matches exciting. Uncertainty keeps viewers wanting to watch, and volatility keeps ecosystems alive. So the system prioritizes engagement over reassurance, and players interpret that as skill being ignored. Another hidden issue is improvement itself. Improvement often reduces mistakes quietly. Losses become closer instead of disappearing. Situations become survivable instead of dominating. But improvement doesn't always feel rewarding. Sometimes it just makes defeats harder to explain. Because now players survive longer before losing. And when defeat still comes, it feels unjustified. They think, I played better, so why didn't I win? And when answers aren't obvious, frustration fills the gap. Watch competitive communities long enough and you'll notice something. Every new game sparks the same argument. This game rewards guessing. This mechanic lowers skill. Old games rewarded fundamentals, but those arguments aren't really about mechanics, they're about expectations. Players expect stability, but modern systems deliver pressure, and pressure feels unfair when players want reassurance, so debates repeat, not because games keep failing, but because expectations never change. Skill today often exists in invisible places: decision timing, risk evaluation, pressure management, adaptation speed, judgment under uncertainty. But these don't create flashy moments, they create subtle survival. So spectators miss them, and players experiencing them don't feel rewarded because nothing dramatic happens. And when drama finally does happen, it overshadows everything before it. Every competitive cycle repeats this pattern. Players lose, confusion appears, frustration spreads. This phrase returns: this game doesn't reward skill. But what they're really saying is, I don't feel in control. And control is becoming rarer in modern competitive systems, not because skill vanished, but because uncertainty increased. Skill used to mean avoiding mistakes. Now skill often means managing mistakes after they happen. And managing chaos doesn't look impressive, it looks desperate, messy, uncertain. So players struggle to see mastery where it exists and assume it disappeared. Because when players believe skill is rewarded, improvement feels pointless, effort feels wasted, motivation drops, and communities become cynical. But the problem isn't that skill stopped mattering, it's that rewards stop looking comforting. Skill still shapes outcomes, but outcomes don't always feel stable anymore, and players are still adjusting to that reality. And this misunderstanding spreads faster than improvement does. Frustration is contagious. One player complains, others recognize the feeling, and soon it becomes the accepted truth. New players already come in believing that outcomes are unfair. Veterans repeat the same complaints across different games, and every new title inherits arguments from the last one. Not because design keeps failing, but because expectations never updated. The conversation stays stuck even while games evolve, and players keep searching for reassurance in systems that are no longer built to provide it. Another change players rarely talk about is satisfaction. Older competitive environments rewarded players with visible dominance. You made the right read, you landed the punish, the round ended clearly. You felt smarter than your opponent. But modern matches often don't end cleanly. Pressure restarts, momentum flips, rounds continue after situations that once decided them. So even when players outplay someone, the match keeps going. And that continuation slowly erodes satisfaction. Players don't get the emotional payoff they expect from good decisions. Instead of feeling in control, they feel like they're constantly surviving the next interaction. So improvement becomes quieter, success becomes less dramatic, and wins feel less convincing even when they are earned, which creates a strange situation. Players can be getting better without feeling stronger, and when improvement stops producing emotional reward, frustration fills the space instead. So players look outward for explanations, balance, mechanics, system changes, anything except the possibility that competition itself evolved into something less reassuring. Skill still matters, but reassurance matters less to modern systems, and players are still chasing the emotional rewards older games gave them automatically. There's also something personal happening here. Losing used to feel like a mistake you could fix. Now it feels like something slipping away from you. Control disappears faster, momentum shifts quicker, and players feel exposed instead of defeated. So protecting identity becomes more important than understanding outcomes. Saying the game doesn't reward skill is safer than admitting uncertainty, because uncertainty suggests that there are things you still don't see. And most competitors would rather believe the system failed than accept the awareness failed in a moment they can't replay. Rewarding skill sounds like a design goal, but most of the time it's really a feeling players chase. A feeling of control, a feeling of fairness, a feeling that effort guarantees safety. But competition doesn't guarantee safety, it produces uncertainty. And uncertainty is where skill quietly operates now, even if it doesn't feel rewarding. And until players separate reward from reassurance, the argument will keep returning. After losses, after patches, after every new release. Because the real issue was never skill, it was expectation. And expectations are much harder to change than games.